help the families with the RNICU and CCN make costumes for your babies. So this tutorial is going to help you take the kits that you've received and turn them into fabulous preemie costumes. Happy sewing! Hey, this is Lillis Taylor with UAB's Institute for Arts and Medicine, and every year we help the families with the RNICU and CCN make costumes for your babies. So this tutorial is going to help you take the kits that you've received and turn them into fabulous preemie costumes. Happy sewing! Before we get started, let's talk about what's in your kit. This is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle costume. These are the little bumps on the shell, and this is the tail. You have a needle, you'll have thread, you probably will have some straight pins. If you do not have scissors available to you, you can also use fingernail clippers or dental floss container that cuts thread really well. So now the demonstration pieces that I'm going to show you today are not to scale. Your pieces may look different than mine do, but the point of this tutorial is to show you how to stitch these pieces on to the felt. So let's start by threading our needle. Go ahead and get out enough thread. I'm going to take this off the screen to measure it, but it's going to be basically twice the length of my wrist to my elbow. So kind of like that. And then what I do not wet the end of my thread when I am threading a needle. I just take all of those strands of thread, I pinch them like I can't see them anymore, and then guide all of those strands through the needle. Now, sometimes you'll get one strand that pops out. You need to get all of those strands through the needle. And if you want, you can use some hand sanitizer that's in the room just to get the ends of this thread wet and so that you can guide it through. Then we're going to leave a tail. And on the other end, we need a double knot. So one, and then just put a knot back on there, like so. Okay, so we have a threaded needle with a short tail, and on the long end, we have a knot. Sorry, we have a knot. Okay, so bring back your pieces, your felt pieces, and since we only have a couple of straight pins, you can kind of decide how you want these bumps to lay, and then you can use the pins to pin two of them down. And then you can take the other two off. So you will start from underneath, and you know, when you're first learning how to sew or first getting back to sewing, it's kind of like, wait, what am I doing? Okay, so you just poke up till you find that you're about that far away from the edge of the first bump. And when I pull this through, I want to hold it where it's threaded because the thread is not tied onto the needle. And then I pull that taut, okay? And we're going to do running stitch. So you go back down. And I want to show you, I'm going to pull that through, but I held it where it's threaded so that it would not come unthreaded. And then you just kind of poke up. Be careful that you don't poke yourself. Hold it, pull taut, and go back down. So let's go all the way around this shell bump. Okay, I'm gonna pause here because something I see often for first-time sewers is that they're here and they're not used to coming up where they can't see something, and they'll say, well, what I can see is to go back down here. Okay, so their thread is on the bottom and they come around the top, and what will happen is your thread will get caught right there. So when the thread is on the bottom, you've got to come up, and when the thread is on the top, you have to go back down. Okay, our thread is long enough that we could go to the next bump, but what you want to do is go behind, okay, and then you would jump to the next bump from the back. Now, if you don't want to jump or your thread is short and you need to get a new piece of thread, let's show you how to tie off. So the thread is coming out near a stitch, and actually okay, the thread is coming out near a stitch. So I'm going to go into the nearest stitch. I'm going to almost pull it all the way, but I'm going to leave a loop. I'm going to grab that loop and pull. And I'm actually going to do a third time because you need to hand wash these costumes and let them dry before you have the photo taken with them. And so you want to make sure that nothing's going to fall off when you're hand washing. So once you've made your knot, you will use whatever implement you have to cut your thread, and you want to leave a little bit of a tail just so that the knot doesn't work its way out. Okay, so once you have a bump sewn on, you can take that pin out, and then you can reposition your next bump. And see, this thread is nice and long, it's ready to get started. So we just need what? A double knot. And we start on the bottom. And you are doing a running stitch all the way around the bump. So if you want running stitch to go a little bit faster and you're getting really proficient at the sewing, you can try to nest your stitches. So you would go down and then come back up, go down, come back up, and that way you're not having to go back and forth with your hand. So now I'm going to show you how to jump across to the next bump without tying off. So let's put this back down here. And actually, if we put a bump over here, it'll be a closer jump than trying to go from here to there. So let's put this little guy like that. And ideally, you don't want a big long strand of thread hanging out. So you're going to slide under this stitch just so that it's a little more secure. And then from the bottom, we're going to come up. And as you can see, my tail is getting close to what I'm stitching. So I'm just going to make it a shorter tail that I can still grab when I am pulling the needle. So let's try the nesting again. Down, up. And you want to make sure that your needle goes through both pieces of felt. Down, up. The problem with this style of doing running stitch is that you go down and then you go up, and there's a little bit more chance of poking yourself. Now, one other thing that I forgot to mention is that when you start this stitch, if you did not tie off and cut over here, make sure that your thread is slack enough and that you didn't pull it too tight and bunch up the costume. Sometimes a pin will get in the way, and so since that's pretty much stable, I can just put my pin away. Now let's show tying off again. So my thread's coming out, here's a stitch, go to the nearest stitch. Now I'm just going to make an anchor point right now. Go back through, leave a loop, grab the loop, pull, it makes a knot. Do that 1 or 2 more times. Okay. Leave a tail and cut. And I'm going to try to make this thread work. Okay, so I just started doing a different knot. Okay, so another way of making a knot, and this is for intermediate sewers, is to rest the thread parallel to the needle shaft, wrap it, pinch, pull, and you have a knot. Okay, start from underneath. I feel like this pin is going to get in my way, and I can hold this last piece. Okay, so while I'm sewing this, I'm going to mention that there are a few different patterns of costume that you can choose from. And so even if you have a totally different pattern than the turtle, you can still use the running stitch, because what you will be doing is stitching the one piece of felt onto the next piece of felt with the running stitch just along the edge. Now, in the next little demo, I'm going to show you what to do if your felt is really thick and your needle is having a hard time going through multiple layers. I'm going to end up having enough thread to finish off this shell bump. But I want to mention that if your thread is really short and you try to finish off with a shorter piece than you'll be able to tie, it really cannot be fun. Sometimes you have to start all the way over with the piece that you were sewing. So when all else fails, just err on the side of having enough thread on your needle. So here's our shell with its bumps, and there is one last step, and that is the tail. And one thing I just want to encourage everybody to do is to look at the finished picture of your costume that's in your kit, because it will give you cues and clues on how to sew different pieces on. So this is the top of the costume, and the tail can be here on top, but it's actually kind of underneath, okay? And so even though we're gonna have stitches going across the top, it's kind of hard to see that. So I would just pinch the two pieces together. You can also use your pen, your straight pen, and then you're just going to do running stitch to secure that tail. And again, I'm working with a very short piece of thread. Don't do what I do. Okay. We need to cut off that last little bit of thread. And voila, there is your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle shell. And now we're going to look at a different costume. So here is Superman, and let's talk about strategy for a second. So first of all, you have 3 pieces of felt that you're having to sew through if you were to do running stitch around the outside of the emblem there. So let's just go ahead and pin this all together. That's 3 layers of felt. And this may not happen to you, so if you want and it works out well, you can totally do running stitch around the S and the outside of the emblem. But if for some reason your needle is not going through the 3 layers, you can also just tack this down. So I'm coming up on the edge through the blue on the edge of the emblem. Come up, and then I'm going down on the edge of the red. And then you could come up, go down, come up, go down. And what you would do is carry this out all the way along the edge here, okay? And you could decide if you only want to do it in some places, like where, you know, of course this is the S too, but you could decide to do it just right there and there, here, here, and here, you know, like that. And then you can also do it around the whole shape. So let's see what it looks like just going around the edges. So as you can see, it ends up looking kind of cool. You can still see the S really well. And even though there's places where it's popping up, as long as you wash it gently and then you kind of press it with your fingers, with your hands afterwards. You don't want to drop this in the dryer. You want to hand wash it and just lay it flat to dry. it should work out really well. And no matter what pattern you picked for your little baby, just remember that you handmade their very first Halloween costume. Congratulations.